Our education system is in a mess and it needs to be reformed. We've got into the habit of thinking that education is about learning things. In fact, education is about the process of simply reading and the process of being used to being surrounded by great literature. Roger Scruton said, and I'm going to quote, we do not merely study the past, we inherit it. And inheritance brings with it not only the rights of ownership, but the duties of trusteeship. Things fought for and died for should not be idly squandered, for they are the property of others who are not yet born. And I think we've forgotten this. We've forgotten this in our reluctance to teach and learn the classics, Greek and Latin. And even where Latin, for example, is taught in schools, it's taught so late that the memory exercise, which is actually very, very convenient when you're 7, 8 years old, is really tough. And that it's not just another language, it's the foundation of European writing together with Greek. If I had my way, all children would study Latin and Greek, and you'd say, well, why bother studying dead languages? And that's the point. And it goes back to Cassiodorus in Calabria in Italy, and he was a monk, or at least he became a monk after he'd played a significant role in the bureaucracy of the fading Roman Empire as Rome fell, as the empire moved to Byzantium, and as the Dark Ages advanced. And he'd been a Praetorian prefect under Theodoric the Great, under the emperor. He had a passion for education, and when he retired from his civil service duties, he retreated to a monastery and set up a plan for the survival of teaching. He established his monastery in Calabria, a monastery called the Vivarium, and he started writing a book called The Institutions, his guide to study. And how do you learn to study? You learn by reading great literature. And it doesn't matter whether those books are ancient texts or whether those books are religious texts. He says, I was moved to devise an introduction to education by writing a book to take the place of a teacher. And his methodology was to teach, was to begin with the Psalms, begin with those texts which probably were known by his monks, and then to go on to teach grammar, to teach rhetoric, to teach arithmetic, to teach astronomy or astrology. There was no distinction between the two. And his interest in preserving the secular topics of the past were an aid, he said, to understanding the scripture of the present. And to this he added the study of medicine, reading the works of Galen and Hippocrates, and of instituting a daily regimen and a priority of copying older manuscripts in Greek and Latin, widening the availability, creating a discipline of reading and writing, and then cementing that with a reverence for the book. For Cassiodorus, goodness was linked to beauty. He takes a Platonic view. Kalos is the Greek word for good, but it's also the Greek word for beautiful. And so the manuscripts which were copied by his monks were illuminated because the knowledge they contained was a treasure that needed to be celebrated in art. And he knew that reading was a foundation for a good education. Not the collection of knowledge, but reading. Reading itself. Getting your hands on books. And as we move into the 21st century, maybe we are less respectful of books. Maybe we've transferred our ability to read and to nurture books and to reverence books into the speedy acquisition of typing on a computer, or indeed listening to Audible. All well and good, but we also need that reverence for books. And I must say, as somebody who does both, I listen to Audible, I read on a Kindle, I also read books, and I play around with the computer a great deal more than perhaps I should. But I find when I've got to base my writing on a text which is on the computer, I find it really hard to find the point where there's a quotation. Whereas when I've got a book, it's easy. And often, I'm afraid, I scribble on my books. But the marginalia, the scribbling, my scribbling, the art of marginalia goes all the way back to Cassiodorus, where monks would scribble little notes in the margins, and those notes indeed have become the subject of academic research. And it's that process of copying, of making your own, of reading, of making notes, where we protect the riches of the past, where we protect our inheritance and make it ours and pass it on to another generation. And without that reading and without that discipline, our education will fail. And we need to move away from the idea that education is purely a utilitarian thing. Education is about preserving the past. And you know, when you switch on the television, you see a documentary about Caligula, Mary Beard, or whatever. How much fun it is, but how little access we have to that, because so few of us have studied Latin or Greek. Now, I was very lucky to be taught Latin when I was very young by an absolute monster. He was a diminutive monster. He was practically Lilliputian. He was not very tall, rather like a sort of maniacal leprechaun. And I remember him hitting people, and I remember him sending people off to be beaten, and I remember him having rages. He was tyrannous and terrifying. We would do whatever we could to be off sick if we could, every day, because Latin was every day. Latin was more central to the curriculum than, I think, even English or maths. But in a way, I salute that, because it was a very good grounding. And towards the end of his time, he also taught Greek. Towards the end of my time at that school, he also taught us Greek. And that, again, is something that I value. In fact, I taught myself Greek before we got to that point. I'd found some old books in a cupboard, and I can remember learning the Greek alphabet as I can remember learning the Hebrew alphabet and Arabic, and trying to work out how to do it. And I don't think at that point I'd come across Russian, but if I had, I probably would have put that into the mix as well. But my knowledge came from books, and my knowledge came from a love of books, and I think that is missing today, and that is something that we need to encourage. And also a love of error. And there's nothing, I think, that gives me more pleasure than finding a mistake in a book, than finding that I make a mistake, or than finding that that something has gone slightly wrong. I find the the foolishness of an error very funny. I've always found it funny. There's nothing I've found more entertaining than giggling in a church during a serious celebration or a serious moment, and I think there's something to celebrate about that sort of lightness that comes with the discipline. It's only when there is a discipline that you can undermine it. It's only in a disciplined environment that you can be a maverick, or that you can giggle, or that you can discover the flexibility, the fun. The fun and the flexibility are there, set against the rigour and the discipline.